What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six podcast. Katie Mox and Will Brinson here. And we are doing our All 32 series, the series where we catch you up with insiders and give you all the information that you need on every NFL team. And today is a very special day because we're talking San Francisco 49ers with 49ers insider and host of the Shanaplan podcast and writer for Niners Nation, Akash Anavarathan. How you doing, Akash?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining us.
I'm excited.
Right. Are you a Niners fan, Katie? I hadn't figured that out through the course of this podcast.
It's like kind of a small part of my personality.
Yeah, right.
She's even got the red on today to
Wait, were you? Did you change? Were you wearing red when we recorded the previous podcast? I mean, obviously we don't do every. I know. You can tell like when we record these too, because like if I were smart, I would think about changing shirts for each podcast. But the laundry quotient there, and also I think I've been accused of wearing that's the same shirt you wore yesterday. I'm like, no, it just looks like all the shirts I own. Any rate, I'm going to I know you guys think I wear the same shirt. I'm going to
Akash, don't let him tell you he doesn't wear the same shirt every day because it's happened.
I actually take the shirt I wear the same day off and then put it on. Anyway, I'm gonna pivot from the obvious first question here because I think I'm gonna let Katie I'm not gonna let Katie ask the obvious one. I'm gonna let her ask the one about her man's Brock Purdy, her new man since Jimmy G left town. And I'm gonna instead ask you on the defense, Akash. What Javon Hargrave. I think we on the Eagles podcast, Jeff Kerr called it like the best signing of the offseason for anybody. And I'm curious, like what do we think we've seen so far from him and how he's going to impact this defense? Jeff used the phrase he's going to unlock Nick Bosa, which kind of feel like Nick Bosa's already unlocked. But man, you look at what the Eagles did with their pass rush. Yeah. They signed him from Pittsburgh, I think, and it was one of the steals of that free agency, and now he gets this big payday because teams realize what he can do on the inside. 18 and a half sacks over the last 2 years. What do we expect the impact will be on the defense with Hargrave in town?
This was quietly an area of struggle for the 49ers to finish out the season last year. Their interior pass rush just was not good enough. I think a couple years ago, they really banked on Javon Kinlaw kind of developing into this type of a player. Unfortunately, injuries, he just never quite got there. And so they had to go the free agent route. And I was surprised because Javon Hargrave, probably the best defensive lineman, one of the best free agents, in this class. And the 49ers went out day one, gave him $80 million to bring him to San Francisco. And, they continue to invest in that defensive line. They believe they kind of build that defense inside out. And now you've got Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave, and Drake Jackson, who's a second-year player. The coaches have been raving about him. And so I think Hargrave's going to kind of unlock those edge rushes, just like you mentioned, with his pass rushing ability.
All right, Akash, elephant in the room. It's so funny. We were talking to Q Myers with the Raiders today, and he was talking about Jimmy Garoppolo, and we don't know who's going to be under center, and is he going to be healthy? I'm like, wow, we finally don't have to talk about that. But yet here we are saying who is going to be the 49ers quarterback again. So from what you know, what is happening in that QB situation? Is it Brock Purdy? It seems to me that he's healing well, and they're hopeful that he's going to be week one. Also, a lot of good information being downloaded about Sam Darnold and how he's been playing. And then there's Trey Lance. So what can you tell us about what's happening in San Francisco in the quarterback room?
I like how you listed them, by the way, in the order of that you want them to play.
Yes, it's Purdy. By the way, this is my quarterback depth chart. It's Purdy, and then it's Sam Darnold, and then it's Trey Lance. And I would not be surprised if Trey Lance moves at some point this season. That is, but Akash, I've been saying this for quite a while.
Yeah, we've been chatting about this, and I can't wait for the offseason where we don't talk about the 49ers quarterbacks and they just roll into the season with the same guy they had last season, and there's no rehab, and it's just not a conversation.
It didn't even happen with Montana and Young though. It's been a while. We had Kaepernick and Alex Smith. Seriously, when was the last time that it was actually you're just wow, the 49ers are good, and not they always have multiple options, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I think it might have been Jimmy Garoppolo's first offseason where he got the extension after 2017, where he wasn't rehabbing. He was the guy. There was a lot of excitement, but since then it's just kind of been up and down with injuries and whatnot. But it always makes for good content, so I can't complain. But like John Lynch has mentioned all offseason, when healthy, Brock Purdy is the leader in the clubhouse. And you listen to any of the players talk, any of the coaches talk, anyone related to the 49ers talk, they all continually say the same thing, that if Purdy's healthy, he's the guy coming week 1. And he's continued to hit every checkpoint in his rehab process, right? I think we're a little over 3 months removed from his surgery. He's actually in Jacksonville this week. He's working with throwing expert Will Hewlett and Dr. Tom Gormelli. He worked with them before the draft last year. They helped him add nearly 5 miles an hour on his throwing motion. So he was able to get a little bit of velocity on his throws before the draft. And I think he just trusts working with those guys. It's a step in the right direction that, his throwing program is going well. And I think Tom Pelissero said he's on track for week 1, which is a fantastic sign. And it's been a while since the 49ers have had a player that has gone through a rehab without setbacks. So it's good to see Purdy on track. And then the other two guys, I think the big thing from OTAs, the big takeaway is that neither guy really separated from the other. And it's OTAs, it's really 7-on-7. There's no offensive line, no pads, none of that stuff. So it's really hard to gauge. But I think the big takeaway was that just neither guy looked that much better than the other to warrant, being named the backup. And Sam Darnold, obviously, he has the support of the coaching staff. I know Kyle Shanahan really liked him since 2018. They wanted to trade for him before he became a Panther. So I know there's been some interest there for a couple of years. Yeah. They talked to him when Darnold was with the Jets, and there was some interest. And it didn't, the trade price wasn't quite right, so it never went down. But there's been interest for a while, and that's why Sam Darnold signed here in San Francisco day 1 free agency. And what a lot of people perceive to be kind of that backup level deal. And then Trey Lance on the other side. I know this offseason he worked with Jeff Christensen, who I spoke to a couple weeks ago. He's the quarterback coach that works with Patrick Mahomes in the offseason. They really emphasize working on Trey Lance's throwing motion, making it a little bit more compact, a little tighter, to have a quicker release, which I know Kyle's a big fan of. And so I think Trey Lance has come into OTAs with an improved throwing motion, but the big question is, how does that hold up in training camp against, when there's a live defense, when there's a pass rush? Can he still continue to deliver with that new improved throwing motion, or does he kind of fall back to his old ways? So I think training camp is going to be really important for those two guys, Darnold and Lance. The training camp, the joint practices with the Raiders, the preseason games, it's really going to kind of determine where they stand, on this team. I truly think Kyle doesn't favor, one versus the other right now, and he's just purely looking at it like who can give us the best chance to win. And I think the new rule where they allow the third quarterback on, the active game day roster really helps both those guys, because it gives them both a reason to stay. So I can see all three of them on the roster, come week 1.
Oh, I think I'd be shocked if they weren't all three there, just because the uncertainty with Brock Purdy and the fact that they like Darnold that much, or have liked Darnold that much for that long. And then, you have if you trade Trey Lance, it's one thing. If there's somebody out there that really wants him, but it's like, man, if you trade Trey Lance and he's good somewhere else, and Purdy gets hurt or Darnold doesn't work out, and you spend, and you're not going to get what you gave up to get Trey Lance. I think you almost have to ride it out. It's the most and I know you talk about, it's great content, and it is frustrating that it's all a lot of what we talk about with the 49ers, but this roster is so effing good. And there's just this, they went to the freaking NFC Championship game
2 years in a row.
2 years in a row, but with Mr. Irrelevant and quarterback, the backup to the backup. Jimmy gets, Trey gets hurt, Jimmy gets hurt, Brock comes in, goes 5-0. They can win with anybody. That's the Shanahan system. That's what everything it is. And it's they're just missing that guy, lock a guy in, and all of a sudden this team, you feel has a window to win a couple Super Bowls, and they thought they had it with Trey Lance. I don't know. It's just it's so fascinating. If you had to set a percentage wise of you get 100% of the snaps, right, or 100% of the games, how would you divvy out the percentage of who starts how many games? It's Brock Purdy 100% if he's healthy, I guess, but I don't even know if that's true. I feel like it could be 33, 33, 33.
That's the hardest part with Brock Purdy, right? He played less than 10 games last season. And so it's a small sample size to just come in this year and be like, yeah, Purdy's just going to hit the ground running. He's going to be the same guy. And, yet I think everyone in the building is really confident that that's the case. So it's interesting because it's not just, okay, if he's healthy, he's the starter week 1, they're going to be, their offense is going to be just as good as it was last year. That's also a question mark, right? Because he's a second-year player. There's more film. There's more tape out on him. So he also has to improve at the same time to be able to, perform that well. So that's also a question mark that's out there. But I would say if he's healthy and he's able to play 17 games, I bet he gets 100% of the pie, like you mentioned.
Yeah, Brady Quinn always tries to keep me a little bit level on Brock Purdy. He's like, wait till they watch film on him. Wait till we see him in the second year. But of course, I'm like, no, Brock Purdy can do anything. Akash, let's talk about CMC. He was such a huge impact guy last year that it's really easy to forget that he was actually a midseason trade. What can we expect from CMC after a full offseason with Shanahan?
Fireworks. I think some of the players called him Mini Bosa, which is, the biggest compliment of it all. Just based off of his discipline, his work ethic, how hard he practices. I mean, this team is full of dogs, but I think there's a couple guys on the practice field that stand out. It's Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, and now Christian McCafrey this offseason. And I think that type of work ethic really is, spreads to the rest of the team. And I think that's probably the biggest thing he's brought in. And, on the field, we know what he is. He's just a dual threat. Can, especially in this offense, the way Kyle Shanahan uses him, truly a chess piece to confuse defenses. And honestly, it was his receiving in the second half of that season that really opened it up for everybody. I know George Kittle talked about this a couple days ago that, just their ability to move McCaffrey across the formation, him after snap, pre-snap, just really confusing defenses, just really open things for everybody. So more than the numbers he put up, it's what he created for the others. And I'd expect more of that this season. And I know the big concern with him was health coming into that trade. And just, he battled some injuries with Carolina the past few years. So can he stay healthy? But I think he's in tip-top shape, and I'd expect big things from him this season.
All right. I love that. We're going to take a quick break here. Brinson seems to have dropped off, and hopefully we'll get him back on the way back. We're talking 49ers with Akash. We'll be right back.
Ha-ha! The magic of the internet. David Tays of this podcast know that my Chrome likes to crash frequently, but it's actually been a while for some reason, and decided to pop up like an injury to a 49ers quarterback. Sorry, too soon. Anyway, long. CMC. I know we were. I think I bonked out in the middle of CMC talking about Christian McCaffrey and sort of how they're going to use him. I think that's what makes it really fascinating. Is what Akash, when we're looking at what they're going to do from a schematic standpoint, and then looking at the odds for McCaffrey here, his regular season rushing yards total is 850.5, rushing touchdowns 6.5. He's like 11-1 to win. Tyrod's a favorite with Jamar Chase. Yeah. I don't think 11-1 is like that crazy for a guy who, so when you factor stuff in, right? Like, all right, are the 49ers going to be good? Yes. We think so, but I mean, it would be a real big surprise if they weren't a good football team with the roster they have. We saw what they can do even on 13 quarterbacks. Christian McCaffrey, obviously if he gets hurt, that'd be a problem, but usage is not going to be an issue. He's going to get the ball. He's going to get the ball in the run game. He's going to get the ball in the pass game, and he's not going to win MVP. Right? Like, it's very unlikely because what is he, 100-1 to win MVP? I actually don't really hate that. But like 11-1 to win Offensive Player of the Year in a full offseason with a Kyle Shanahan. He studies the playbook so aggressively. He was so prepared to when he stepped into that role in San Francisco. Like, I actually think 11-1 is a decent price. The rushing touchdowns I would rather go with at over 6.5 -130 than the rushing yardage, just because I think that they will try and, like, analytics show that it's the touches that you get. Like if like a passing, a reception is much less, hazardous to your health than running between the tackles, et cetera. So I think they'll be kind of smart about that.
Would agree there. And just back to the Offensive Player of the Year odds, I just think they're going to kind of get this NBA super team kind of thing where they're going to almost, be discredited because they play with so much talent on offense.
Fair.
Right? With Kittle, with Ayuk, with Deebo, with McCaffrey, and Elijah Mitchell when he's healthy. I just have a feeling that there's too many mouths to feed.
Vulture each other, sort of.
Exactly. And that almost is going to, diminish his impact, even if his numbers are going to be great. And I think there's going to be someone else out there who's on a team that doesn't have as much talent, just put up bigger, better sheer numbers, and it eventually win that award.
Okay.
What about Deebo Samuel? Because I feel like Deebo was the guy, and then he kind of gets overshadowed a little bit since Christian McCafrey came. And by all accounts, it was not Deebo's best season last year. He came out and said even that all of the contract negotiations cut into his work ethic. He didn't prepare as well in the offseason. He is locked in. This year, you look at his receiving yards, 800.5, receiving touchdowns, 4.5. That under juiced, though, to -130. What do you think we can expect from Deebo this year?
Much better than last season. And just like you mentioned, I think he admitted to it. I think the contract negotiations spilled into training camp. I just think he wasn't in the same training regimen that he was the previous offseason coming into 2021. And I think he just looks a little bit more motivated, a little bit more focused. He looks like he's in a lot better shape this time of year than he was at the same time last year. So I just expect him to hit the ground running. And again, with Christian McCafrey in this offense throughout the year, I expect them to use both those guys kind of interchangeably, which is what they did in the playoffs, right? You just really don't know. Sometimes you get McCafrey in the backfield, Deebo Samuel lined up out wide. Sometimes you get Deebo in the backfield, McCafrey lined up outside. I think you're going to get a lot more of that, for 17 games, and it's just going to benefit all of them. But the receiving prop does sound kind of high at 800 yards, especially with the amount of mouths to feed. I think Deebo, you'd imagine his rushing number to be a little bit higher, and maybe his receiving number to take a little bit of a hit. So yeah, I'd agree with you there.
There's also like the factor too, where if San Francisco is as good as we think, it's very possible that, they're up, like we could see, I mean, you wish it were Trey Sermon, but it's not. I won't let Trey Sermon go, but it's just very possible that, even, if they're bludgeoning the Cardinals, right, that you don't see Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell getting a bunch of carries in the middle of the regular season, that they try and spread them around. I mean, clearly they're going to get their guys their touches, but I think the goal of this team, is that they're so good that they can get to the postseason and be extremely healthy. And we'll see, how that goes. It can clearly pivot in different ways just based on how the season goes and all that. At any rate, Steve Wilks takes over for D'Amico Ryans. Wilks notably blitz heavy in his time, especially his first run with Carolina. I mean, that's his thing. He loves to dial up blitzes.
Do not blitz a lot. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. How do you I guess I sort of wonder, what do you think we'll see from this defense in terms of aggression level? Will Steve Wilks be given free run to do whatever he wants to fire up blitzes, or is Kyle going to say, look, this is what we want to do on defense? Because surely they talked about that in the interview.
100%. And I actually think Steve Wilks, like you mentioned, is going to be significantly more aggressive than D'Amico Ryans, who was significantly more aggressive than Robert Saleh. It's like they've just gotten slightly more blitz heavy each time they've switched defensive coordinators. Robert Saleh more, your traditional cover 3 base defense, a little bit more vanilla, less blitzing, and that worked, right? Took them to the Super Bowl. They had a top 5 defense, both in 2019 and 2020. Then D'Amico Ryans comes in these last few years, a little bit more exotic with his blitzes, right? Involving Fred Warner, Dre, and Greenlaw, excellent blitzing linebackers. And now I think we're going to see Steve Wilks kind of take that to the next step. And his background is in, the defensive backfield. So I expect the corners, the safeties, they've got a couple of young safeties, and Hufanga, they drafted a safety, Jair Brown. I expect those guys to develop well under Steve Wilks and it to be a more exotic defense. I still think it kind of stems from this cover 3 kind of single high type of defense, but I would expect them to be more and more aggressive. I'd expect a lot more, press man from their corners, which we've seen less of over the past few years. So I expect their defensive backs to maybe take a step up because that's where Wilks' expertise is. But overall, their defense is just loaded with talents. I've always thought defense a little bit more about the Jimmies and the Joes, less about the X's and O's. And I think they're just loaded at all 3 levels. So I expect them to sustain that top 5 type of play this season.
All right. The vibes are high for the Niners. 11.5 wins is their total. They're tied with the Eagles and the Chiefs, I believe, at the very top. Can the Niners get 12 wins?
I think the biggest question there, and it's seemingly the same one every year.
Again,
quarterback health, and I think the added variable this year is their travel. I think they travel an insane amount. They've got multiple East Coast trips, a couple where they stay out there back to back. They start on the season on the road, a couple games. They play a first place schedule this year, which they benefited from not playing last season. So their schedule is slightly tougher. And that 17th game is now an AFC hosted game, so it's on the road. And so I just think tougher schedule this year. I think they're going to be, Vegas does a good job of saying they're going to be right around that 10, 11, 12 win mark. And so, that's tough. I would lean the under, but
wouldn't want to bet it.
Yeah, that would be the smart play to me. Yeah, I wouldn't.
It's really high.
Yeah, I mean, 11 and a half, like, especially, and we talk about this when we do the win total bets, and I read about this in the column when I do all the over-unders on CBSSports.com, but it's like, you really shouldn't be betting an over on 11 and a half wins in June or July,
right?
Because there's just so much that can happen injury-wise between now and the start of the season, and it's pretty unlikely to move up. We've got these division odds on the screen. I mean, I'd be lying. Like, the Cardinals at 27-1 is just a hilarious number. I mean, I wouldn't touch it. Like, I mean,
it's huge.
It's like 27-1. There are at least 10 to 15 teams that have lower Super Bowl odds, and the Cardinals have odds to win the division. 27-1 to win the division, where you have unknown with the Niners, Geno Smith, and then Matthew Stafford, who, by the way, is 8.5 to 1 to win the division. Like, I think this might be the rare case where, and I really like Seattle. I think Pete Carroll's done a great job with it. Does a great job year in, year out. Seattle could certainly surprise, but like minus 175 feels a little cheap for the Niners when you think about this roster and what's going on elsewhere in the division. I don't hate that. Like, I'm probably gonna have a little bit of the Rams at 8.5 to 1, just because I think it's a bounce back spot for McVay.
He loves the Rams.
I know, I love the Rams. So I don't know what to tell you.
I
love the Niners too. I picked the Niners to win the Super Bowl 2 years ago.
I know.
But I think like minus 175 is not an unfair price, and maybe a good price for San Francisco. It's a lot of juice to lay. It's early in the offseason. But anything under 200 for the Niners, given that roster, to me in this division, feels like a okay number.
This I love, just because the 49ers absolutely obliterated the division last year, 6-0. And they played the Seahawks 3 times. And I think in 10 of those 12 quarters, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
I mean, they throttled them in the regular season. And then in the second half of that wild card game, just absolutely took over. So I just think that matchup favors the Niners. The Rams, their problem is I honestly can't name half their defense. It just feels like they've got these 5 or 6 guys on both sides of the ball that are stars, and then after that, it's
like 3
guys.
Now. It's like down to 3.
Yeah.
It used to be 5 or 6.
It's their roster is rough. They're going through a transition year. I expect them to be better than maybe people expect, but I don't think they have a chance to compete in this division. And then the Cardinals, I mean, their odds say it all.
Yeah, that would just don't donate your money on that plus 2,700. One more question, Akash. We talked about Deebo, we talked about Christian McCafrey, but the Niners really do have kind of an embarrassment of riches on offense. If you look at some of these player props, George Kittle with Purdy had a great season when the two Iowas got together. And then there's been a lot of chatter about Brandon Ayuk and how he's going to come off and have a great season. Any of those player props that you're looking into, whether it's receiving yards, touchdowns?
We're on the same page, because those are the exact 2 players I was thinking of.
Yeah.
George Kittle's regular season receiving touchdowns, I think it's at 5.5. I love the over on that one. I think he had 7 in the last 5 games of the season with Brock Purdy. He went on an absolute tear. He said, I think it was a career high. So I'd expect that relationship to continue this season. And I think Kittle's going to easily surpass that number. I think he missed the first couple games of the season last year too. So if he's healthy, I know he's in the best shape of his life. That's what he said. So I like him to surpass that number. And then the other one, Brandon Ayuk's receiving yardage. I think it's at 800 or 801. Yeah, and that feels low to me, because I think he had 1,015 last year. It was his first 1,000-yard season. Every single player on the Niners said that Brandon Ayuk was the best player on the field in OTAs. He was dominating that defense.
Interesting.
And so I expect him to have a big year. I think he's headed into the 5th-year option season after this one. So it's a possible extension year. I could see him being motivated by that and just coming back and putting up big numbers. I think he's going to have probably one of the better receiver seasons, just across the league this year. So I like him to surpass that number too.
All right. I like that as well. Akash, thank you so much for joining and talking 49ers with us. Make sure you stay tuned for more all 32 daily drops in your podcast feed and on YouTube. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to this video. Thank you, Akash, and we'll see you next time.
Appreciate it, Akash.
Thanks.